The first signal came at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. Dr. Sarah Chen was the only one awake in the communication hub when the speakers crackled to life with a sound that would later be described as the worst thing humanity had ever heard: a human voice, broken and desperate, gasping out coordinates through static and what sounded like explosions in the background. "This is Dr. Marcus Reed, lead researcher, Station Kepler 442. If anyone can hear this, if Earth is listening, we need help." A pause. The sound of something crashing. A scream, cut short. "They're here. The Xyrillian delegation. They said they wanted to negotiate. They said they wanted peace. We trusted them." Sarah's hands shook as she initiated the emergency protocol. Within seconds, her screen filled with data, biometric readings from the station, visual feeds, audio logs. Everything that Station Kepler 442, humanity's most advanced research facility orbiting the habitable zone near Kepler 442, transmitted automatically to Earth. What she saw made her stomach drop. The Xyrillians had arrived 2 weeks ago, the first official diplomatic visit to humanity's deep space station. They were tall creatures, almost 7 feet, with skin that rippled like oil under lights, and eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. They had come with an offer that had made every government on Earth hold its collective breath. They represented a coalition of 17 advanced species, a unified galactic council, and they wanted to extend protection and trade to humanity. Earth, they said, was ready to join the larger community of civilizations. It was the dream humanity had pursued for centuries. First contact, not with hostility, but with open arms and the promise of sharing knowledge that could elevate human civilization by millennia in mere years. It had been too good to be true. And it had been. The video feed showed the moment the Xyrillians revealed their true purpose. The diplomatic exchange had been pleasant, conducted in the central observation dome of the station where the blue-white light of Kepler 442 cast long shadows across the metallic floors. Dr. Reed and his team of 47 scientists, engineers, and security personnel stood in a line, smiling, confident. Then, the Xyrillians' leader, a creature named Vexethol, made an announcement. The 17 species of the Galactic Council wanted something. A gift, he called it, to solidify the relationship between Earth and the Council. They wanted a sample. Of humans. Living humans. Genetic material alone was insufficient. They needed to study human adaptability, human resilience, human consciousness in ways that only direct experimentation could provide. 50 subjects, they requested. For advancement of all civilizations, Vexethol had said, his voice smooth and reasonable as though he were asking to borrow sugar rather than human lives. When Dr. Reed had declined, Vexethol's response had been immediate and absolute. The Xyrillians had weapons technology that made everything humanity had developed look like stone tools. The researchers didn't stand a chance. Now, watching the feeds from her office in Houston, Sarah saw the moment the slaughter began. The Xyrillians didn't use direct weapons. That would have been cleaner. Instead, they released something into the station's atmosphere, a chemical agent that caused the human nervous system to gradually shut down from the extremities inward. It was slow. Deliberate. Agonizing. Through the station's cameras, Sarah watched her friends, her colleagues, people she had eaten lunch with and celebrated promotions with, slowly collapse as paralysis claimed them. Dr. Reed had managed to reach the emergency broadcast station. His voice, already weakening, had sent that final message to Earth. "They're experimenting on us," he gasped, each word clearly an effort. "They wanted to see how long we could survive without neural function. They wanted to observe the moment consciousness ends. They said it was educational. For the Council. They said all civilizations must contribute to the growth of knowledge." Sarah heard something else in the background. Laughter. The Xyrillians were laughing. "Earth," Marcus continued, his voice barely a whisper now, "if any government official is hearing this, know that we didn't surrender. Know that we fought. Know that the transmission ended." Sarah sat alone in the communication hub, her hands still shaking, staring at a black screen. Around her, the Earth continued to spin on its axis. In offices across the planet, people slept peacefully, unaware that humanity's first official contact with advanced alien life had just become humanity's worst massacre. She reached out with a trembling finger and began the sequence that would alert the President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and every major government on the planet. Within an hour, the information was classified, compartmentalized, and discussed at the highest levels. Within 2 hours, every military alert was activated. Within 6 hours, emergency sessions of the United Nations Security Council had been called. And, throughout all of it, the question that no one wanted to ask hung in the air like poison gas: what would the Xyrillians do when they discovered that there were 7 billion more humans on Earth? The answer came faster than anyone expected. 2 days after the station Kepler 442 massacre, a ship arrived in Earth orbit. It was massive, a vessel that made the International Space Station look like a grain of sand, and it transmitted a message in perfect English on all frequencies, broadcasting to every device capable of receiving a signal. The message was simple. We represent the Unified Council of 17 species. We have just completed our evaluation of the human sample. Results indicate that humans possess exceptional qualities that make them ideal for our purposes. We are prepared to offer your species something unprecedented, a guarantee of non-extinction in exchange for a voluntary supply of subjects for ongoing research. The Council will provide technological advancement and protection from hostile species. All we require is regular shipments of 50 human subjects per month. Failure to comply will result in the removal of all protection, and your species will be designated as suitable for harvesting without limitation. You have 72 hours to respond. We await your decision at these coordinates. The message was signed by Vexathol himself. For the first time in recorded history, every nation on Earth was united in one thing: absolute, overwhelming terror. In the quiet halls of the United Nations, in the war rooms of military commands, in the homes of world leaders, the same thought echoed like a death knell. Humanity had to decide whether to sell its own people into slavery and experimentation or face annihilation. The Council of 17 species that ruled the galaxy had made their calculation. They had weighed humanity's options and found them all wanting. There was no third choice. There was no negotiation, no diplomatic solution, no clever technological breakthrough that could save everyone. Humanity was being asked to choose between its soul and its survival. They did not know that they would have a third option. They did not know that in 72 hours, a woman named Elena Vesquez would stand before the Unified Council and speak words that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. They did not know that sometimes, defiance in the face of impossible odds was not a sign of weakness or stupidity. Sometimes, it was the most powerful weapon a species could possess. And, sometimes, the greatest strength of humanity was not its ability to survive, but its absolute refusal to survive at any cost. The emergency session lasted 18 hours without break. World leaders, military commanders, scientists, philosophers, and ethicists gathered in conference rooms that had never before held such weight of desperation. The debates were fierce. Some argued for immediate compliance. 50 humans per month was a small price for humanity's survival. There were 9 billion humans on Earth. 1,000 per year was statistically insignificant, they claimed. A necessary sacrifice to ensure the survival of the species. Others argued for resistance. If they gave in now, where would it stop? Would the Xyrillians eventually demand thousands? Millions? Would they simply take Earth anyway once they no longer had any incentive to negotiate? The resistance camp was smaller, but their arguments were not without merit. The third group, perhaps the most desperate of all, looked for alternatives. Scientists worked frantically to develop weapons, strategists examined possibilities for escape, engineers explored every option that might allow humanity to hide, to scatter, to somehow preserve their species across the galaxy in small pockets that the Council could never fully control. But, deep down, everyone knew the truth. Humanity had been handed a loaded gun and told to choose between shooting itself in the heart or having the gun fired by someone else. There was no good option. There was only the terrible mathematics of extinction, played out in real time by beings who had the power to erase their entire civilization. It was on the 16th hour of deliberation when Elena Vesquez stepped into the General Assembly room. She was not a politician. She was not a military strategist or a famous scientist. She was a diplomat, career foreign service, a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to read people, how to understand cultures, how to find common ground in seemingly impossible situations. She had negotiated trade agreements between hostile nations. She had mediated conflicts in regions where violence had been considered inevitable. She had made her career on the impossible becoming possible through words, through understanding, through finding the shared interests that all sentient beings possessed. And she had spent the last 4 hours watching the broadcast feeds of station Kepler 442 over and over again. The video of Dr. Reed's final moments. The laughter of the Xyrillians as humans died. The casual cruelty of beings who had decided that human life had value only as a laboratory resource. When she entered the assembly room, every eye turned toward her. The President of Earth, the current holder of a title that rotated every 5 years to ensure no single nation held too much power, stood and gestured for her to approach. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of 7 billion lives resting on his shoulders. We've been informed of your diplomatic background. We need your assessment. Is there any possibility that we can negotiate with the Xyrillians? Any path that might lead to a peaceful resolution? Elena looked at him. She looked at the faces around the table, at the faces of the leaders of every major nation, every significant political and military power on Earth. She saw their desperation, their fear, their calculation. She saw people who were trying to save their species and hating themselves for every option they considered. She had spent 30 years learning the art of negotiation. She knew all the techniques. She knew how to find what the other party truly wanted beneath their stated demands. She knew how to identify leverage, how to build trust, how to create the illusion of mutual benefit. She had taught countless students that every conflict had a resolution if you understood what the other side really needed. But she had also, just recently, learned something new. She had learned it by watching humans die while their murderers laughed. No, she said quietly. The room fell silent. There is no negotiation possible, Elena continued, moving to stand in front of the assembled leaders. Not because we lack the skill. Not because we cannot find common ground. But because the Xyrillians, and, by extension the entire unified council of 17 species, have made it clear that they do not respect human beings as sentient creatures deserving of consideration. When a party enters a negotiation believing that you are animals fit only for experimentation, you cannot negotiate with them. Negotiation requires mutual recognition of each other's basic dignity. The president leaned forward. Ambassador, are you suggesting we reject their offer? I'm suggesting we do something far more dangerous, Elena said. I'm suggesting we tell them the truth. That humanity will not trade its people for survival. That we will not bargain with murderers, no matter what the cost. A general seated to the left stood up, his face red with anger. You're suggesting we commit suicide for a principle? We have a duty to preserve human life, not waste it on symbolic gestures. I'm not suggesting a gesture, Elena replied calmly. I'm suggesting the most practical response we could possibly give. Think about what happens if we comply with their demands. We send 50 humans, and we gain 70 years of peace, maybe longer. But, every month, we send 50 more. Every year, 1,000 humans are removed from Earth and subjected to what we've seen they will endure. The Xyrillians gain a renewable resource. A species they don't have to conquer, that cooperates in its own victimization. She paused, letting her words settle. But, more importantly, we send a message. We tell every predatory species in the galaxy that humans can be broken. That we will sacrifice our principles to survive. And, species, especially powerful ones, respect only strength. Not military strength necessarily, but moral strength. The absolute refusal to compromise. That is what makes a species dangerous to predators. That is what makes predators move on to easier prey. An economist shook her head. That's a gamble. A bet with the lives of 7 billion people. No, Elena said. Compliance is the gamble. Compliance is betting that the council will honor their word, that they won't eventually decide they want more, that they won't eventually harvest Earth regardless. History shows us that predators always want more. This is the only move that doesn't end in our extinction. It either saves us, or it loses us nothing we weren't already prepared to lose. The debate continued, but something had shifted. Elena's words had cut through the paralysis, the sense that there was only one possible choice, and that choice was slow death through collaboration with their own destruction. Over the next several hours, a plan emerged. Elena would go to the Unified Council headquarters, a space station positioned in neutral territory, the L4 point between Earth's moon and planet, exactly in the balance point between the two celestial bodies. There she would give humanity's answer to the Council's demand. She would deliver her refusal to their face. The ship that carried her across the void of space was the fastest Earth had ever built, but, even so, the 48-hour journey felt eternal. Elena spent her time reading the files, watching the broadcasts, understanding the species she would be standing before. The Council consisted of beings from every conceivable evolutionary background. Insectoid species with hive intelligence. Silicon-based creatures that had evolved on worlds no human could survive. Energy beings that had learned to constrain themselves in physical form. Reptilian intelligences. Carbon-based life forms so alien that communication had taken months to establish even basic protocols. And they had all agreed, unanimously, to demand human sacrifice. When Elena finally stood in the communication chamber aboard the Council station, she was alone. The other ambassadors representing allied species lined the walls, curious observers to what they assumed would be humanity's desperate plea for mercy. They did not know what was about to happen. They did not know that they were about to witness something that would define galactic politics for centuries to come. Elena looked at the assembled council, 17 representatives of species that had collectively ruled the galaxy for longer than Earth's entire civilization had existed. She saw Vexathol in the center, the Xerillian whose laughter had echoed over dying humans. She thought of Dr. Marcus Reed. She thought of the 47 other people who had died on station Kepler 442. She thought of her own daughter, who had been playing in the park when the station's final broadcast came through. She thought of every human who had ever lived and struggled and dreamed and built something beautiful, only to have it cut short by cruelty. And she opened her mouth to speak. The words came out steady and clear, projected through the translation matrix so that all 17 species could understand perfectly. Elena did not raise her voice. She did not make threats. She simply spoke truth, the way one might state the color of the sky or the orbit of planets as a simple fact that required acknowledgement. "We do not bargain with murderers," Elena said. The silence that followed was not the silence of stunned disbelief. It was deeper than that. It was the silence of beings encountering something they had not anticipated, something that fell outside their operational framework of how power-based relationships functioned in the galaxy. Vexathol's form rippled with what might have been laughter. "You misunderstand, human. You are in no position to refuse. We have demonstrated our capability. We have demonstrated our willingness to use it. You have." He paused as if searching for words. "No leverage." "No leverage," Elena agreed. "But neither do you, and that's the point you're failing to understand. You can destroy us, yes. You can harvest Earth. You can take what you want through force. But what you cannot do is get what you actually came here seeking." An ambassador from the silicon-based Krethnal species leaned forward, their form crystallizing as they focused their attention. Through the translator, their voice emerged as the sound of ice cracking under pressure. "And what exactly, human, did we come seeking?" "Alliance," Elena said. "Community. When you first sent your ships to station Kepler 442, you came as if extending an invitation, not issuing a demand. You came pretending to want partnership. And you did this because you knew that genuine alliance was more valuable than forced cooperation. You knew that a species willing to negotiate, willing to find mutual benefit, willing to cooperate willingly, was better than one forced into compliance through fear." She stepped forward, despite every instinct telling her that moving closer to these creatures was an act of incredible foolishness. By demanding human subjects for experimentation, by slaughtering our scientists, by making clear that you value human lives only as laboratory resources, you've destroyed the very thing you came seeking. You can force humanity into a submissive state, yes. But you cannot force us into genuine alliance. You cannot force us into being what you wanted us to become. A representative from the insectoid Velshera hive clicked rapidly, their multiple eyes focusing on Elena with an intensity that felt almost physically pressing. When they spoke, it was with the unified voice of 1,000 minds. You believe that your pride is worth extinction? That your principles matter more than the survival of your species? I believe, Elena said, that once you give in to fear, once you begin sacrificing your own people to predators, you've already become extinct. Your body might still be breathing, your species might still technically exist, but you've lost the thing that makes you human. And I believe that any species powerful enough to demand that another become less than human is powerful enough to destroy them anyway once they've shown they're willing to do it. She looked directly at Vexathol. You came to us assuming we would calculate the odds and comply. You came assuming that every species, given enough fear, will choose survival over principle. But you made a critical error in your analysis. You assumed that because you would make that choice, because your species would trade any principle for continued existence, that all species would do the same. The Xerillian's form began to ripple more rapidly, and Elena recognized it as a sign of agitation, perhaps anger. You misread humanity, she continued. We are not cold calculators of genetic survival. We are animals who will gladly walk into fire if we believe we are walking for something worth dying for. Throughout our entire history, humans have chosen principle over comfort, meaning over safety, dignity over survival. It is this quality that has made us what we are. And it is precisely this quality that you cannot accept because it represents everything your species has evolved beyond. Enough, said Vexathol, and his voice cut through the chamber like a blade. You have had your say, human. Now you will listen. Your defiance is noted. Your refusal is recorded. But, understand this, we will leave Earth alone. Not because of your words. Not because you have convinced us of anything. But, because the Council has reached consensus that humans are unsuitable for our purposes. A species this irrational, this prone to choosing self-destruction over rational self-interest, would be an uncontrollable variable in any laboratory setting. You would die faster than useful data could be extracted. He paused, and Elena felt something shift in the chamber, a change in the weight of power itself. However, Vexathol continued, you have also just made your species a matter of galactic interest. Your refusal, your defiance, the absolute rejection of your own extinction, this will be remembered. Humans will now be known throughout the Council as a species that does not negotiate under duress. This is a reputation that will serve you well, or poorly, depending on circumstances. Is that a threat? Elena asked. No, said the silicon-based Krethnul. It is a prediction. Species that are valuable as allies seek you. Species that are predatory note that you cannot be broken through conventional coercion. This will reshape every interaction you have in the galactic community. The insectoid Velshera clicked thoughtfully. There is precedent in galactic history. The Tar Confederation refused to submit to the old Drovian Empire 3 centuries ago. Rather than face the inevitable warfare with an opponent that would not surrender even when defeat was mathematically certain, the Drovians withdrew. Some believe this defiance was why the Tar eventually became one of the most respected species in the galaxy. A pause extended through the chamber, and, in that pause, Elena understood that something fundamental had just changed. The Council had come to Earth expecting to absorb a new species into their hierarchy. Instead, they had discovered something they had not expected, that there were still civilizations in the galaxy willing to die rather than compromise their fundamental nature. The Council is adjourned regarding Earth, Vexathol announced. Let it be known that humans are a species to be approached with clear understanding of their nature. They cannot be threatened into submission, therefore alternate approaches must be considered in future interactions. Elena was escorted from the chamber. The station's corridors felt infinite as she walked back to her ship, followed by protocols designed to ensure she reached her vessel safely. No one stopped her. No one threatened her. She was simply allowed to leave. When she reached the communication deck aboard the Earth vessel, she immediately opened a channel to the planet below. Her face appeared on screens across every continent simultaneously. Every major language had her speech translated in real time. "People of Earth," she said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "We will not be submitting to the Council's demands. We will not trade our people for survival. The Council has agreed to remove their threat of harvesting from our world." The response came in waves. Celebrations in the streets. Tears of relief and joy. The governments of Earth, which had spent 72 hours preparing for the worst possible outcome, suddenly found themselves preparing for something they had never expected to have, a future. But Elena, watching the celebrations broadcast back to her, understood something that most of the celebration masses did not yet realize. They had survived, yes, but they had not won. They had simply refused to lose in a particular way. They had made clear that if the galaxy wanted humanity, they would have to offer something better than death or slavery. And, in doing so, they had changed their position in the cosmic order forever. The news of humanity's defiance spread through the galactic communication networks faster than lightspeed travel could transport a ship. Within weeks, diplomatic ships from species that had previously shown no interest in humanity began to arrive. The Tar Confederation requested trade agreements. The Crystal and Velfun sent scientific exchange protocols. Even the ancient Kepler Collective, a species so old that they had forgotten the names of their worlds of origin, expressed interest in establishing formal relations. Humanity's refusal to bargain with murderers had sent a message far louder than any military might, that humans possessed something rare in the galaxy. An absolute, uncompromising core. A people who would not break, no matter the pressure. But they had also made themselves a target. 3 months after her return to Earth, Elena received a classified briefing. Intelligence agencies had detected increased military activity among the predatory species of the Galactic South, civilizations that preyed on weaker species and had no connection to the Council. These species had heard of humanity's defiance, and they had interpreted it as a sign of weakness rather than strength. If humans would not negotiate even to save themselves, they reasoned, then humans were irrational. And irrational species were often the easiest to destroy through unconventional means. One of these predatory civilizations, the Vreth, had begun calculating the logistics of a major assault on the Sol system. Elena stood in the office of the new Earth Council president, looking out at the blue planet below, and understood the next crisis was already forming on the horizon. But, this time, Earth would not be negotiating from a position of terror. They would be negotiating as a people who had proved they would rather stand and fight than submit to predators. This time, the predators would need to decide what they were willing to sacrifice. Dr. Marcus Reed and the 47 scientists who died on Station Kepler 442 had not died in vain. Their sacrifice had been a catalyst. Their suffering had taught humanity something essential about itself, that there were things worse than death, and that sometimes the only path to true survival was the refusal to survive at the cost of your own soul. In the galactic archives, now and forever, one phrase would be recorded with humanity's species designation. One phrase that would eventually become their defining characteristic: we do not bargain with murderers. It was not a threat. It was not a boast. It was simply the truth of what humans were, creatures who could not be broken because they had decided long ago that certain things were worth more than life itself. Worth more than safety. Worth more than comfort. Worth more than everything except their own unwavering refusal to compromise. And, in a galaxy full of civilizations that made calculations based purely on survival and power,